Welcome to the One SJI Diversity Podcast. My name is Tiara Neal, and as always, I'm your host. This month, during the month of May, we will be celebrating our Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And this month, joining us will be Safir Qureshi and Andrew Lau. And we have something to look forward to this month because their perspective is unique to them, and so I look forward to that. And I want to welcome Andrew and Saphir. Thank you for joining us this month, guys.
My name's Andrew Lau. I'm in the engineering services department. So just to give a little bit of background on myself is I'm Chinese. My father was from a small province in China. It's called Fuzhou. So it's not like the major languages you hear like Mandarin, Cantonese, very, very small province. And then my mom was from Singapore. So I was born and raised here. Very different lifestyle growing up since I was 9 years old. We worked at one of those fast food Chinese American restaurants. So a lot of my time was allocated to working at that restaurant and helping out my parents at home chores as well as the restaurant. So as a child, I probably resented that in some way because I didn't share the same experiences as my peers. But as you get older, hopefully I'm less brash, more mature. You start to appreciate the experiences that I had, and being an Asian American versus having been born overseas, you kind of get to see multiple aspects of culture. And I think that I can bring that over to professional workspace. And what I mean by that is that it helps me understand that everybody has a different perspective, right? Regardless of culture or anything in general. So the biggest thing that I take into the workplace and in life in general is being able to listen, understanding that your experience as an individual is not the end all be all, not being afraid to ask questions and just being naturally curious, without being offensive, of course, has really brought me a long way within South Jersey Gas, I would say. So, Saphir, what can you tell us about yourself in terms of here at SJI and as well as an individual?
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Safir Qureshi. I'm with the government affairs team at SJI. Personally, I am a first generation Pakistani American. Both of my parents were born in Lahore, Pakistan, and they emigrated to the United States in the 80s. And then they decided to move to New Jersey. And then they had my brother and myself. So that was an interesting experience for sort of all four of us, really, and inclusive of my extended family that lived with us for when my parents first moved to the country. So I grew up in a house with my mother, my brother, my father, my grandmother, and an aunt and an uncle. It was a really interesting sort of thing. I mean, I was just trying to figure out school and stuff like that. My parents were trying to figure out an entire new culture and a new way of navigating the world they hadn't really come in contact with. I always found it interesting because we had to grow up kind of quickly. For example, the one I'll always use is my parents brought me a legal document. I could have been older than 10 years old. And they're like, while they both spoke English really well, they're like, can you help us out with what this means? Like there's some disconnect, like I can't figure this out. So in that respect, it was kind of cool to have that experience. You were growing along with your parents, but when you were sort of outside of the home, I mean, I grew up in a really, really diverse community in central New Jersey, but there was always sort of the feeling of being the other when I was younger. And that was not something I was able to really come to terms with, like me being who I am. It's really difficult to hide, written all over my face, as they say. So to come to terms with the fact that, yeah, indeed, my parents are immigrants. We probably do things a little bit differently than some other folks do. It took a long time to actually get there and accept that. And then a even longer time to embrace those differences, I think.
Being first generation, you definitely felt some type of disconnect. I'll say even amongst the Asian community, for those who were born overseas, even to them, we were seen as an outsider. But then, of course, being an American, we were an outsider because of our different ethnicity. So it really hit home with me with what Saphir said is growing up, I would say, you're going through high school, you want to fit in. I felt like I almost shunned my culture and my background back in when I was younger because I was trying to assimilate with the crowd in school in America. But then as I got older, obviously you branch out. You might even move to a new city where there's a lot more diversity. I'll say at that point is when I really started to embrace it, I guess is the word. I used to, I would say I'd actually thought about it more.
Yeah, I think for me it was like the switch happened when I don't want to be associated with this because it makes me different, and then I realized that that difference is sort of the value that I bring now. For folks that look like us, there's a whole generation of kids who I don't want to say this is like it applies to everyone, but I will say for myself, there's a lot of pressure in our culture to be the best and to I'll be completely honest. There were three choices growing up for all my cousins who grew up overseas. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. I'll be very honest. I'm you guys know this. I am not any of those things. I'm a government affairs professional. I make my living maintaining relationships, and I guess some folks could call me a fake lawyer, right? But that sort of pressure to succeed was internal, and it was also external. Folks would kind of if you got a bad grade, if you got a C on a test in high school, folks would look at you like, "Aren't you supposed to be the smart one?" It's like, well, why? It's entirely based on the way I look. You have no other context for saying something like that. So that was sort of the beginning, and that's why I think when I was younger, I wanted to kind of stay away from that. But now, what I found to be really interesting and kind of cut across all sort of groups of folks is food. And that's the way I like to experience different cultures. It's usually the way I dip my toe in the water and figure things out. But I've had a lot of people over for dinner, and I've made them traditional Pakistani meals. And I think that's a really good way to show your culture. And like when I was younger, if my parents packed me Pakistani food for lunch, I was not going to eat lunch that day because you're going to get the stares, you're going to get the finger points, you're going to get the ew, what is that? So it's been a really kind of fluid change to accept who you are. And for, I don't know, for food is the one thing that sticks out to me because I love eating, but I've always found that to be really interesting.
Food, traditions, let's say even like mannerisms or some things. When you talk these out with other people, you start to see that, oh, I think my father was like this because he was an old generation. But really, you start to see how these things relate and connect, and how we can be pretty similar in some ways. And I think that's a great way to connect with others.
You said something interesting there though about tradition. So I have a question for you. What is your favorite Chinese tradition to partake in and tell other people about?
For us, Chinese New Year's is pretty big. So it doesn't start on the same date of every year. It goes by the lunar calendar, which I'll be honest, I don't know how that looks. But it's generally within your end of January, mid-February timeframe. It lasts about 14 days. What the tradition that our family does, and I'll be honest, I don't think a lot of my other friends, none of them do this, so I don't know where this came, but like the first night of Chinese New Year's, we'll always wear brand new clothes. So the day before, you'll go to sleep in a new set of pajamas. And then when you wake up, whether you're going to work or whatever, you need to plan for that. You need to have a fresh new set of clothes. So that was always cool. When we were children, we'd always receive those red envelopes filled with money. So once we got to about 18 years old, that's when the money stopped coming. Which wasn't which is cool. And then it's pretty interesting is when you get to a certain age, or for us specifically, is when we marry, is when we start to reciprocate that favor and start to pay back our parents, whether it's monetary, you buy fruit or other things. So that's a pretty big time of the year. When we were younger, we used to all get together as a family, including relatives, aunts, cousins, just have a really big party. But as you get older, you can imagine it's not as easy to schedule that, but we still make it a point to celebrate even within your own immediate family.
That's pretty cool, especially
Yeah.
the new clothes on day one. I like that tradition.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know anybody else who does it, to be honest, but it's something that stuck within our family for sure.
For us, so as I'm a Pakistani American, right? But I'm also a Muslim. So one of our biggest holidays, we have two of them. There's called Eid. The one that just passed is probably my favorite and the one that my family really goes hard for. And it's the one that marks the end of Ramadan. So you spend an entire lunar month, you can't eat anything but while the sun is up. And then the day preceding that month is the antithesis of that. So there is every single amazing food you can think of on the table. Everybody's family gets together and hangs out. Everyone wears traditional clothing that's typically also new, but I don't think that's a rule that my family necessarily does. You might get called out for wearing the same thing as last year, but our tradition has always been at that particular event. There's also money giving to be done, but our demarcation is that if you are not married, you're still eligible to receive money. So I'm not married, so I got a few envelopes a few weeks ago. Uh, but no, that's a really fun tradition. And what we like to do is typically all the women will cook for our anytime there's a big event. But for this one, it is the responsibility of the men, which I'm not sure any other family does because they probably don't trust them that much.
Is it similar? Is where when you do marry, you're expected to reciprocate with those envelopes?
Oh, absolutely. So
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, all my cousins have a list. They're like, "Yo, man, I gave you money this many years. I can't wait
yeah,
for you to at least give it back to my kids." So
yeah.
it's kind of funny.
That's funny you say that actually. When we have our weddings too, there's a traditional set. They call it the tea ceremony. So what we do is the bride and the groom will stand up really in the middle, the center of attention, and then you'll call up if we're doing really traditional, really any adult, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, and then even their family friends will all come up to this area, and what you do is you bow and then you serve them tea, and then they return the favor with gifts and money. And it's like you said, between our aunts and uncles, it's a tally between them as siblings. They'll say like, "Oh, I gave your kid this amount. It's time for you to reciprocate." So that's very similar there. It's actually kind of funny when you get to hear them talk it out and duke it out, if you will. But it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's got an aunt with a ledger, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And like, I think it's cool that you bring up weddings because that's one of those things that varies drastically, right?
Mm.
So like a Pakistani wedding is 5 days long.
Wow.
There's a lot of events. There's a lot of outfit changes, and anyone you've ever shaken hands with or looked at is invited. So, but that's one of those things where if I think if anyone ever has the opportunity to do that, to attend a wedding of someone of a different culture, a different background than you, that's a really eye-opening experience because even the process to be married is different. The way we celebrate being married is different. So you mentioned the tea ceremony. For us, it's all about sweets. So the
Mm.
bride and the groom sit up in front of the room, center of attention, like you said, on a couch, and everyone's going out there getting their photos taken with the bride and groom. But then everyone needs to feed you a sweet. So yeah, it gets really rough. I've seen some family members up there just like, oh, please let this be over now. No, there's 200 more guests waiting to see you.
Yeah. It's almost like your wedding meal right there, but all its sweets.
It's just a cool because it's the intersection of everything. You have the clothing, the food, the dancing, the music. I think is really important, and all those things in one place and everyone's celebrating. So I think, at least for me, if anybody ever wants to get to know our culture, try to attend a wedding.
What I thought was really cool is here we are, two individuals with two diverse backgrounds, and our experiences growing up, even when you get older into marriage, like look how similar they were, right? Like we were able to just talk it out and relate, and we're a lot similar in more ways than we thought, you know what I mean? Which I thought was really cool. So it was cool to have this discussion and see how we all relate.
Andrew, do you find it interesting that Asian people vary so much? Like it's such a broad definition that applies to such a large group of people who look so different. I don't know. I've always thought about that being kind of crazy. Like it's a massive continent, right? And there's such a it's a diverse cultures, religions, everything. To put the entire continent as one sort of as one idea, one sort of people is almost kind of crazy.
It's interesting for sure. One thing that I'll say kind of annoyed me growing up was when you say Asian, people automatically think Chinese for some reason. I don't think that's as prevalent today as people are exposed to more backgrounds and cultures, whether that's through social media or just hopefully just people getting out there and starting to learn other experiences.
It just keeps me up at night. What I usually like to tell people is I can watch baseball on Sunday and go to eat a traditional Pakistani meal on Sunday night, and that's who I am as a person, right?
I like
I
that.
think that's the advantage that we do have. It's an all you can eat buffet between cultures, and you can pick and choose what you want. I think that's the fun part.